Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get going here. We're on the hour, so the time is now. This is the Jurisdiction Gap panel. Just some reminders here, some laundry list items before we get going. This will be recorded. It is live then, but will be released on YouTube afterwards. There's a live Q&A portion of this, and I really encourage, if you're listening, please put your questions into the chat, and if they fit my flow of conversation, I'll get them in as I go, but I'll make sure that I also reserve time at the end for your questions. But yeah, what we have here is called the jurisdiction gap. Risk assessment and being able to quantify risk is one of the most important skills that you could develop in this industry. And a critical portion of that is understanding jurisdictional risk. Now, some investors prefer to operate solely in Tier 1 jurisdictions, which is a very simple way to manage this side of things. However, I believe that this approach also strips away tremendous opportunity for investors looking to find that one project, that diamond in the rough. So the secret then is being able to contextualize and understand jurisdictional risk and be able to weigh it properly against individual investment opportunities. Joining me to explore more of these concepts of how to understand and effectively assess jurisdictional risk are three CEOs looking to advance their own exploration projects from three separate countries. Joining me then are President and CEO Luke Alexander of Nucor Gold with their Enchi project in Ghana, President and CEO Simon Ridgway of Volcanic Gold with their Motagua Norte project in Guatemala, and President and CEO Pat Donnelly of Serra Energy Metals, formerly E79, working for Green Energy Metals in Brazil. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. I'll just ask each of you individually, just take a second here and maybe just explain yourself, your company, and your flagship project, just to kind of get the ball rolling here. Luke, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, sure. So as Matt introduced, I'm Luke Alexander, President and CEO of Nucor Gold. Nucor is advancing the Enchi project in Ghana. It's a district-scale exploration project that's been de-risked with a very robust PEA, as well as a resource on the project, and we're in the process at the moment of updating our PEA, which incorporates an updated resource that we put out earlier this year, and continuing to move the project forward towards a construction decision.
Thank you, Luke. Simon, you want to tell us about Volcanic?
Yeah, my name is Simon Ridgway, President and CEO of Volcanic Gold Mines. The company is active in Guatemala. We optioned a lot of ground from Radius Gold, which is also in the same gold group of companies. We're running into 60% of two discoveries that have been made by Volcanic on Radius's ground. Both early stage. One is we've got a resource on the Holly property, about 400,000 ounces and 9 grams, which I think we can grow significantly when we get to work in that area again. And we have a more recent discovery in Motagua Norte in a Cirilo 1 concession. We put out some news last week on some very, very high-grade gold discoveries in the Motagua Norte zone.
Thank you, Simon. And Pat, do you want to take it home for us?
Sure. My name is Pat Donnelly of Serra Energy Metals, almost at E79. And we're formerly doing gold exploration in the state of Victoria in Australia, and we just recently transitioned to an exploration company looking for green metals in Brazil, and hence the change to Serra Energy Metals. And so specifically, we're exploring for copper, nickel, and lithium, and we have a number of acquisitions lined up, and so stay tuned. And so far, what I've seen in Brazil, I've been very, very impressed with. I'm very excited about some of our prospects that we're going to be coming up with.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. So the way that I've kind of structured this conversation, it's two parts. Part one, just want to focus more on you as individuals, on your approach to jurisdiction. Then to part two, we'll transition to talking about your specific jurisdiction, if that makes sense. But I just, maybe, there's no place to start like the beginning, right? When you were first starting out in your careers, gentlemen, what was your attitude to jurisdictional risk, and has it evolved since then? I mean, have you always been what we would call jurisdictionally agnostic, or how much has your understanding or opinion of the jurisdictional risk evolved from the get-go or from the start? And we'll just work backwards. Pat, do you want to go first for that one?
Well, when I was a young geologist 30 years ago, most of my experience was with major mining companies. And it certainly was there in the background, but for different reasons. You worried about jurisdictional risk in the context of how it interfere with your activities, as opposed to concerns by the markets, by governments, by environmental groups, by investors. So, mostly, when I was younger, you would, most of my technical experiences in Canada, you might send a letter to the First Nations. If you didn't get a reply, you just assume you're fine, and off you went. And nowadays, over time, obviously it's changed significantly. I worked as a mining analyst for a while as well, so I had a lot of opportunities to go to different countries and see, how much of a challenge it is. And I think nowadays it's definitely evolved, because shareholders, that's often their first question is, what country are you in? Why are you there? And what are you doing about engagement and ESG and all those things? So it's definitely evolved, and it's now just part of good business practice.
No, thank you, Pat. And Simon?
Well, when I first started out, I'm not a geo, I'm a prospector, financier now, but early on in the days, I was a prospector. So basically, I used to say to people, I have to go where there's no competition, because I'm not very good at what I'm doing. So that's what I kind of focused on for a few years. My first venture out of Canada was into Venezuela. And the timing, I got pretty lucky, because the timing was perfect. I think the only company working there at that time was Placidome. It's a long story how I finished up going to Venezuela, but I was there, and I struggled for a couple of years, flying back and forth over all those, as a prospector, all that satellite is not very good to prospect in. But so I'd fly back over Central America and see all those mountains when I get into that region. But luckily, Friedland came along in '94 and made it the place everybody wanted to be, and I had quite a land position there, so I was in the right place at the right time. But from that point on, I took a look at the area I'd been flying over, Central America and the Caribbean, and basically, my next step was into Honduras, because nobody was there. So I did find that going into places where the politics was on the verge of changing, where nobody else was exploring, it left a lot of low-hanging fruit for me to pick. I mean, I've made quite a number of discoveries in Central America over the years, and partly because of that reason. I took the political risk and not the geological risk. And that's still the same today.
Thank you. And that's a couple of things that I'd like to touch on, but I'll circle back to those. What about you, Luke? What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, starting out, I had the view that the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. And, at the end of the day, there is an element that, if you take certain risks, then you can get outsized returns out of as a result of taking that risk. But I guess for me, where my thinking's evolved on it is that there's certain risks that are just too big to even be able to push a project forward and become, just non-starters from that perspective. And, security is one that ultimately comes top of mind. Obviously, countries that are, have sanctions in place, those ultimately are places that, as a publicly listed company, it's impossible to operate. So when you delve into all the different risks that need to be analyzed when looking at advancing a project and taking it towards a construction decision, or even entering into a greenfield exploration stage asset, you got to look at all of those risks, and, any one of them can ultimately lead to a decision not to move forward on that project. And certain people will go, well, these risks are associated only with certain parts of the world. And the reality is, if you look at Canada, US, Australia, people will say those are safe jurisdictions and I can invest in any project. But when you delve into the individual assets and the projects and where they're located, there can be social issues, for example, that ultimately mean that those projects will never lead to a mine. So evaluating all the different risks, I think, is crucial. And West Africa, if we look at it in the early 90s, it was producing less than 1% of the gold globally. West Africa is now the largest gold producer, where it produces more gold than China, Russia, Canada as a jurisdiction, and that has people will have viewed West Africa as a risky area, but those risks have been managed, and as a result, is now represents about 14-15% of global production. So it's really looking at the individual risks and calculating the chance of success based on those risks.
Yeah, and they all change. West Africa countries change. Burkina Faso was great 5 years ago. I think it's still pretty good. I mean, I'm involved still with Fortuna Silver with mining there without an issue. There's been several government changes, but it hasn't really affected the mining in the country but the exploration for sure. And I guess another bigger decision we got to make is which countries can you raise money to go exploring, right? I mean, sometimes you can't. So if you can raise money, that's one of the first things that I think about. How's the market going to respond to me trying to enter this country and explore?
If you can actually find it.
It's not a mind builder, so that's my level's always pretty early stage exploration is what I love. So can I raise money to explore there? And is it safe for me and the geos that are going to be under my employment?
Yeah, the safety, and I mean, what I think is interesting is that there are as many risk profiles for a project as there are investors looking at it, right? And the way that different people are going to interpret different things. And so, I mean, Luke and Simon, you both kind of mentioned these. Then the different aspects or categories that you can assess risk on, or start to understand this. I mean, Luke, you mentioned security and sanctions. Maybe I'll ask you guys, and maybe Pat, I'll let you take this one first. Do you just want to highlight 2 or 3 different aspects of jurisdictional risk assessment that you look at that stick out to you as most important things to you, or things that you value in terms of your interpretation?
Well, the first thing I look at is the government, and whether the government is pro mining or not. I think that's the easiest thing. If you have and it doesn't have to be a national government, it could be local government, it could be state government, it could be provincial government, and what their attitude is. Because if you have a government in there that's going to give you a hard time, then you don't want to go in there. And the other thing I do is, like I said, we're focusing on Brazil, and I've been down there a few times already, and I spend time down there just to see everything for myself. And we have Brazilians working for us, and we talk to the locals. And the other thing I do is I also look at what some of our competitors or peers are doing down there as well. But you start with the government. You stay out of areas that are environmentally sensitive, and you make sure you have good relationships with the locals. But certainly the political situation is number one, because that's what gets to the headlines in the news, and that's something that's often difficult to overcome.
No, excellent. And maybe Luke, I'll ask you, do you have anything in addition to what Pat mentioned there?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously security risk, which we touched on, and there's a lot of good organizations out there who put out risk profiles of different countries, as well as political risk assessments that investors can use as tools. And then, financing risk is the other thing. I mean, as great as a project can be, and our views as CEOs of, the resource or the project and the ability to advance it, if investors have a different view and you can't finance that project, then that becomes a significant risk as well. So that'd be the other one is, what is the what is the market's perception of a jurisdiction, because that will ultimately dictate whether you can finance that project or not.
Excellent. And Simon, do you have any additional color on this topic?
Yeah, I think another factor is timing. I mean, countries change, as I said earlier on, and if you, as I did when I first went to Venezuela and in Central America, go to countries that you feel are reinventing the mining law, or in fish, when I first came to Guatemala, they were just creating the first mining law. Guatemala was never a mining country. So, you know, when I first came here in the late 90s, we sort of worked with them to help them design the mining law, pointing at places like Chile, saying you haven't got to keep inventing the wheel, you can just copy other countries' mining laws to some degree. So timing is a big factor. I mean, you take a look at Ecuador, for example. You know, when Lundin and Ross Beatty entered back into Ecuador some years ago, it was a no-go area for 4 or 5 years. Now it's prime. Bolivia, same thing. So timing is a big factor in all of these things, and I like to get in before it's become popular and take that extra little risk.
Yeah, and then Matt, Patrick talked about obviously political risk, and that's typically at a national or federal level, but obviously really knowing what the local community's views of a project are is also crucial. So all levels of government right down to the local communities, because again, you look at certain projects in, what are viewed as safe jurisdictions, Canada, US, Australia, there's local communities who will never allow those projects to develop or get built. So, you can have a state government, a federal government who's fully supportive, but if you don't have the locals who are closest to the project supportive, that can be a risk that you can't manage as well. So, all levels of government, it's crucial to be comfortable with.
No, excellent, guys.
Right. And generally work, generating as much work as you can and as much, in the local communities, buying whatever you can, employing a lot of people instead of a DA cat to clean roads and things. I think that can really change that attitude from the local people, right? Showing that
it doesn't cost much. It doesn't cost much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't cost much.
That proactive approach to, you call it ESG or just community relations, I think that's a huge aspect of what you would call 21st century mining that maybe wasn't there a couple generations ago, right? And that community consultation and effort to get them involved. And so maybe this is actually, again, a decent segue. I will transition here and start talking about, your individual countries here, right? Because I think there's kind of an interesting mix here of jurisdictions that we can discuss. So I'm going to ask you kind of a two-part question here. And so on the first half, I'll be asking about advantages and benefits that maybe people don't see as much. And then the second question I'll follow up is maybe, what is a core risk in your view remaining, right? Because I guess, and maybe I'll try not to get on my soapbox for too long, right? I mean, I think anybody in this sector, if you're investing in this sector, you know that there's like immense amounts of risk at all times, right? And I think that what investors always want is just that clarity from their company that not hiding or trying to avoid risk, but just a clear conscience or a clear expression of what those risks are. But like I said, I'll get off my soapbox. Easy question, right, Les? Before I get to that one, just tell me a way in which you believe that your individual country has an unearned reputation in terms of how it's viewed, right? Like what investor fears do you believe are unwarranted when it comes to your individual jurisdictions or countries? And Simon, I'll let you take this one first. Why not?
Okay, well, it's a good place to start because Guatemala's got a terrible reputation right now. I've worked in Guatemala off and on for the last 20 odd years, and again, timing is important, but right now, obviously, there's two big aspects to the attitude towards Guatemala. The Escobar mine that was put into production, I think in 2014 or 2015, it was shut down in 2017 because the government didn't do the consultation with the indigenous population in the area before they granted the license. So that mine has been shut down since 2017. It was purchased by Pan American for $1 billion a while ago. And it's still not back in production. I think, I'm not going to put a time to it, but I believe strongly that it will be back in production sometime in the near future. It employed 1,000 people. The 1,000 people that were working there were poor people that had now all of a sudden got a job. They got to, maybe they bought land and started building a house, put their children in good schools. And then, the anti-mining groups shut it down, and those 1,000 people become unemployed again. Half of them must have gone bankrupt because they no longer had to work. They're back to back to living on rice and beans again. I think we will see Escobar back in production in the near future, and I think that was the first step to change people's attitude towards mining in Guatemala. And people need work here. The unemployment rate is very high. There's a lot of people joining these caravans to go to North America. I think slowly it will just become clear that if you want to generate employment, you need foreign investment. You need to, develop the resources the country has. And I think that attitude is changing quickly in Guatemala at the moment. There is still certainly aggressive anti-mining groups that are not actually local. They're foreign. They're from Scandinavia for some reason. A lot of the money seems to come from, but I do think that's changing. The Bluestone mine didn't get developed. I mean, it was purchased by Lundin, and they had it permitted for an underground mine. Then they decided to go open pit, and they sort of gave up 6 months ago and put it on the block. Nobody's purchased it yet because of Escobar and because of the attitude to Guatemala. As I've said before, I always think timing is important, and I entered Guatemala about 3.5 years ago when the new government came in that was supposedly pro-mining, but it didn't really change anything, didn't change the Escobar situation, and then Bluestone couldn't get permitted for the open pit. But what I did was raise enough money to outlast that. So when I came into the country with Volcanic, I raised 13 million. We still have 4 or 5 of that left. We've made 2 discoveries. The burn rate is very low. I'm just waiting for the time to turn when Volcanic and shareholders can benefit from these discoveries we've made and from the change in attitude. I think the timing is good.
No, thank you, Simon. And Pat, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on unearned reputation or maybe investor fears about Brazil that you think are much ado about nothing or unwarranted?
Well, I think the main thing is a few years ago we had the tailings dam disasters, and that brought a lot of attention on the behavior of mining companies, and the concern is that it'll prohibit companies from developing assets there. And I think what it's done is it's given companies a wake-up call to practice good methods to development. But and then the other thing obviously is corruption, and the president current president there, Lula, he was in jail for a number of years and for corruption, and finally managed to, he appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court of Brazil, and somehow got off, and now he's been reelected. So there's that overhang, and but so far I think he's realized that mining makes a good contribution to the country. So that's the number one concern in a country like Brazil is corruption. But the good news is, Simon made a good point. He wants to go in the countries where he's, get the first mover advantage, and sometimes it's good to be maybe a little bit behind that first mover. The first mover does all the heavy work, and they take all the arrows and everything, and then you come in later and kind of learn from them. And what I mean by that is, when I was looking at Brazil. There's a number of Canadian and Australian companies down there, and I have connections with, and I talk to people, and I'm like, what is the environment like down there? How are you finding things? And what are the challenges you're finding down there? I think you just got to educate yourself on what those challenges are and anticipate the challenges that could come up. But like I said, I think the number one thing is corruption. Number two is concern about, obviously, the other concern is, people worry about, people keep asking, are you going to the Amazon? And because they think of Brazil, they think the Amazon. I'm like, absolutely not. We're not going anywhere that's threatened or delicate or endangered. It's not worth it. So I think that's the other thing we deal with.
No, thank you, Pat. That was a question coming up. So yeah, obviously deforestation of the Amazon is a hot button topic, right? Luke, what about you? What do you think about Ghana? Do you think people get wrong, right? That it's not worth the fear they have?
Well, I mean, Ghana is obviously in West Africa. It's the largest gold producer within West Africa. And West Africa has seen a number of, challenges over the last few years with, security issues in different parts of French West Africa, as well as there's been a few coups in West Africa in recent years. So, Ghana ultimately being in West Africa gets bucketed along with all the other countries in West Africa. Whereas, Ghana, if you look at any of the reports out there, it's had free and fair elections for the last, 40 plus years. They haven't been subjected to coups that we've seen in other parts of French West Africa. But again, by virtue of it being, in West Africa and have a number of neighboring countries who've had these issues in the last few years, ultimately gets put into that same bucket. But again, it's a very safe place to operate. Whenever I'm in country, we don't have any security, drive across the country, no issues from that perspective. It's got a very long history of mining. I mean, it's called the Gold Coast for a reason, over 200 million ounces discovered. So from that perspective, there's a very good mining, history there, which then ultimately means there's a very sophisticated mining code in place. And I think at the end of the day, for investors, probably one of the best things to do is look at who's operating in a country. In Ghana, we've got 3 of the top 10 largest gold producers on the planet. In West Africa, we've got 6 of the top 10 gold producers with operations in West Africa. So, we can talk about how great our individual jurisdictions are. But at the end of the day, I'm 100% biased as the CEO of a single asset company in Ghana. But look at what the major companies are doing. The size of their political risk and security and ESG teams alone would dwarf the entire size of our company. So for them to be comfortable to pour billions of dollars into Ghana and into West Africa, I think speaks for itself. So, that's probably the biggest thing as an investor listening to this to take away is don't listen to what I say, but look at what the major mining companies are doing in Ghana or any jurisdiction that you're looking to invest in.
No, that's well stated, right? I mean, it's similar-ish to what Pat was saying. As you're talking about first mover advantage being maybe more advantageous to be second mover, but just understanding how others are succeeding or failing in that jurisdiction color your interpretation too, right? So flip side, I mean, I'll just say here, I mean, I preemptively appreciate your candor, right? But on the flip side, right, what is the core risk, right? And I mean, I have this phrased in my notes as what is the largest core risk of operating in a jurisdiction that prevents it from, some re-rating, if you would, to a tier 1 status? That doesn't necessarily have to be the core of the question, but I guess what I'm asking of you gentlemen is, what is it? What is the big issue? What is the big bugaboo of operating in your country? And we'll go Simon for this one first.
Yeah, well, in Guatemala, it's certainly not violence. I've been here for, as I said, working in Guatemala for over 20 years off and on, and with no issues at all. There are a lot of guns in the country, but there's really, I've had no issues, and neither have any of the staff that work for me. And I've had a presence throughout that whole 20 years. So the core issues here is trying to wait for the time when the people of Guatemala stop getting influenced so much by foreign anti-mining groups and start to understand that they want work. And I think that the guy that won the election 6 months ago, 3 months ago, was saying that that's what he wants to create employment. That's what the country needs. That's what the people need. And that's what mineral exploration in the country can help a lot with. So I think it's a matter of time. I was early when I came down, and I realized I might be, so I raised enough funds to wait it out. We've made 2 great discoveries. Holding costs are cheap. I'll be here for a while longer.
Prepared to be patient, patient man. So this actually, Simon, I'll ask you this as a quick follow-up here. Kurt, pardon me, asks you, you mentioned that you go where there are changes happening, but when you get in there early, you bear that infrastructure brunt of not having service providers, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you square that circle of getting drill rigs and experienced drillers and contractors into the country, and how much of a challenge is that?
It's not this trip to Guatemala has been a bit more challenging, not for the drilling, but for the assay labs. There's only one assay lab in the region, that was in Nicaragua. So we had to create our own prep lab. So that was something we had to do. Previously, I've invited labs to come and join me in the country when I moved into one, and that was doable 10 years ago. Not so much these days because they're being consolidated. So there was a lot of small labs that did work for juniors all over North America, and now they're being consolidated into probably 2 or maybe 3 large ones. So it's a bit more difficult. But we created our own prep lab and we ship it up to Mexico or Vancouver. That works fine. The drillers, there's a lot of drill companies in Central America, in the neighboring countries. They're quite happy to come up into Guatemala, even though we had one burnt a while ago. That didn't deter the company from wanting to come back in here again once we start drilling on the new project.
So just a little bit of...
It's all manageable.
Yeah, all just lead time issues, eh? Yeah.
Exactly.
And Luke, I'll let you go next. You discussed quite nicely, Ghana being a strong jurisdiction within a weaker region. What on the flip side of that, what are some remaining risks that you have to grapple with?
Yeah, so inflation's been a big one the last couple of years. I mean, like a number of emerging markets around the world, inflation's been rampant in Ghana, and the government is in the process of negotiating a bailout with the IMF. So that's something that we obviously have to manage is the inflation that we're seeing in the country and some of the risks that comes with potential lenders down the road and exposure to Ghana as a jurisdiction that is in the midst of an IMF bailout. On the flip side, there are some benefits to that. Obviously, a lot of the money that we raise is in Canadian dollars, and anytime you have your local currency depreciating, then your dollars can go further from that perspective. So there's a bit of a natural hedge there for us, but obviously if it leads to potential instability within the government and within society, then that's something we need to be monitoring closely. I mean, I will say this will be the 17th IMF bailout that Ghana's gone through since independence in 1957. So it's not the first time we've seen this, but again, if you look at the chart for the SETI, which is the Ghanaian currency, you'll see it's significantly depreciated over the last few years. So that's something that we obviously monitor quite closely.
Thanks, Luke. And just this will be a follow-up from Sravinder in the audience here. And just, again, when kind of referencing the risks of your neighbors more so than Ghana itself. I mean, when we see the chaos in Burkina Faso, or as you say, kind of related coups, how much of a risk is there that this spills into Ghana? And then maybe more to the point is what sort of fail-safes, or what is Ghana doing to ensure that it remains kind of the still port in the storm of what can be a rather tumultuous region?
I mean, Ghana's obviously a very established country. I mean, they've obviously got, a military who can help in terms of, protecting their borders and preventing, I guess, groups from other countries coming into Ghana. So, all of those things is something that, the government will manage and keep a pretty close eye on.
No, thanks, Luke. And Pat, I thought you kind of did a good job on your initial response of, you discussing corruption. And so you kind of gave me a twofer there in terms of your response. But do you have anything else you want to add in terms of just, the risks that you grapple with, that you're trying to kind of keep your eyes on to prevent?
Yeah, it's, I'm sure Luke and Simon would have the same issue is, often if there's an election or a change in government, often mining becomes a political football. And specifically, as I mentioned, The previous president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, was very, very pro-development and very, very pro-business. And then Lula's come back in, and, Lula is an avowed socialist. And so you're always worried that out of the blue, he's going to, try to change the Mining Act or expropriate land or pull off some sort of other stunt to bolster his standing. So that's usually what keeps me up at night. But so far he doesn't control the Congress there. He doesn't control the Senate, and so the what he can do is somewhat limited. And he's also focusing on other things in Brazil. But like I said, I've been down there a few times now, and I've been very, very impressed. They've really rapidly developed their infrastructure, and actually Lula's done a great job. He's expanded the power grid throughout the country, and so any little village, every little town, everything has power, and cell phone towers. Like we were talking before this call, about how when all of us were younger, when I worked in camps in northern Canada, we used to use an old radio to get in contact. Now you have satellite coverage. Well, that's all really improved in Brazil. It's really modernizing. It's 200 million people, and the economy's booming because of the agricultural industry. And I think that has knock-on effects for mining as well. So I'm very, very pleased to be down there.
Excellent. So yeah, I've got kind of one bit of one more nut to crack here, I suppose, with you guys, and I guess I'll say I'm going to put you on the hot spot a little bit here, and just to ask you directly about kind of recent in-country events, are potentially relevant to investors and your company, right? And so, a little bit of a local flavor for each of you here. I'll start with Simon, right? So Guatemala, Simon. I mean, it's no real secret, right? I mean, your drill crew had an accident or incident in last February, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, where the rig itself, not the crew, was attacked. Can you just provide some clarity, using the benefit of hindsight on that situation? Why did it develop? And then maybe more to the point, why is that event not a reoccurring risk?
Yeah, well, I think we did a little poor job ourselves working with the social community, which is unusual for me and my group. But the project itself was right beside a busy road, and all of the drill rig from all the holes we drilled, which I think in total was about 25, were right beside the road. So constantly people are driving by all the time, just on the way to the different towns. So we didn't work closely with the community. Outside of our local area, we worked closely with the community right where the project was, employed quite a number of people, and we didn't really deal with it when the anti-mining groups started publishing articles in the local newspapers about the damage we were doing and that we were polluting the water by drilling. We could have done a better job. Since that happened, I haven't developed that project further because I've been waiting for Bluestone to put the mining production. There's about 60 kilometers along that same paved road. There's a 3.5 million ounce deposit being developed, was by Lundin, and somebody will develop it. And until that is permitted for an open pit or it's built as an underground mine, I think I will just leave the Holly sitting there for this, because we have 400,000 ounces at 9 grams underground. The place to process that will be down the road. The new discovery we had is in a different area. We put a lot of time and effort into working with in a bigger regional sense with the locals. It's a very arid area. People need work, and we're employing quite a few people there. And I think that's what we need to focus on. We're doing a lot of work, pre-work before we start drilling there to make sure that people know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what it could bring if we're successful.
No, excellent. And yeah, no, well said. Again, it's returning to that proactive approach to community engagement, right? So, Luke, I'll go to you. This one I'm kind of interested to hear because I think this is, it's not just a Ghanaian issue. This is something you go, like, I mean, I know I've heard similar things from Brazil, for example, too. But, like you mentioned, Ghana, I mean, the Gold Coast, long tradition of gold mineral exploitation. And of course, this starts with artisanal miners, right? Small scale guys just going out, with a rock, so to speak, or with a hammer, pardon me. And so now, as you see, as Ghana continues to establish itself as this international mining jurisdiction of note, there's conflict arising, right, between, like you say, your standardized international corporations and then the informal local artisanal miners on the other side. I know there was one where they were underground hiding from police for some time, right? But so I guess my question for you is, I mean, I know that you're pre-production, so it's not specifically of issue to you yet, but right, do you have artisanal miners on your property? What is your relationship with them, and then how does that fit into to your vision of what Nucor can be?
Yeah, so I mean, when you drive around Ghana or you drive around West Africa or lots of parts of the world, I mean, you'll see artisanal mining everywhere. I mean, on the weekends, people will go out and alluvial mine different properties in Ghana as a hobby. So it is, entrenched within the culture, and as a result, it's a very pro-mining country. From a government perspective, obviously, they want to make sure that any mining that's happening in country isn't, having a detrimental impact on the environment, as well as making sure that people are safe. So I think the reference that you're making in terms of some of the underground mining that got shut down, I mean, a lot of these, mines are incredibly unsafe. So from a government perspective, they want to make sure that they shut as many of those down as possible because, lives are at risk. In terms of some of the alluvial and more open pit, small scale mining that you see in country, obviously the government, doesn't want those types of mines to be using mercury and impacting waterways and various other things. So, the government is stepping in where necessary to make sure that, the environment is protected and that people are ultimately safe. One of the things that encourage people to, have a look at is the Ghanaian government through MIF, which is the Minerals Income and Investment Fund. They've set up a fund that basically is investing in different mining projects in Ghana. But one of their initiatives is they're taking $60 million and they're allocating that to small scale mining to try to help institutionalize small scale mining in country, to provide them resources to be able to ultimately improve the way they're mining in a more safe and environmentally friendly manner. So without a doubt, anywhere in the world, you're going to see conflicts when governments come in and potentially impact someone's livelihood. But really the motivation is, for the environment and also safety. And I think the fact they've gone above and beyond and allocated $60 million to, really helping small scale miners in country, shows that they want that to be, continue to be part of the fabric in country, but it want it to be done in a safe and environmentally friendly manner. Sorry, and then specifically, Matt, you asked. Yes, on our property, we have some artisanal miners. We've had relationships with them for 10 plus years and never any issues. But we don't have a lot of outcropping at surface, so that's really where you see big artisanal operations, is when you have lots of outcropping, so on and so forth. So we've got a handful of individuals, and lots of them are people who on the weekend come out and look to find a little bit of gold. So no issues from that perspective, specifically on our property.
Excellent, thank you. And so yeah, and then Pat, the one that I have for you, and you mentioned, I mean, not deforestation, not a risk, right? You're not tearing up the Amazon here as others are. so question for you then, and again, you kind of discussed this a little bit or touched on it previously, but I mean, yeah, Brazil, it does have a reputation, and not unearned, as you kind of yourself referenced. I mean, corruption, organized crime, and then this kind of connections to resource extraction from there, right? So I mean, there's obviously lots of challenges here. State governments continue to be vulnerable to corruption, right? There's headlines that I don't need to go into, but yeah, they occur. So I guess my question for you then is, I mean, how do you confront and work within a culture of no, I don't want to say it's universal or standardized corruption, but how do you be successful while keeping your nose clean in a culture where maybe there's expectations of greasing wheels, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it's quite simple. You just don't engage in it, because you got to remember, as a Canadian citizen, the I think it was the Liberal government put in the Foreign Officials Corruption Act or law, and so we have to adhere to that. And so if someone did come along and wanted us to pay to grease the wheels, and if we did that, I'd be complicit. I'd be breaking the law, and I would go to jail. So it's just something you can't do. And I think Brazil's evolved. They have Bolsonaro in there, and they had the election, and the election was clean and fair, and Lula got back in, and so I do think the system works there. And the other thing is, like I said before, there's quite a few other Canadian companies working in that country, and international companies working in that country, that seem to be able to carry out operations, and we haven't heard any noise about corruption. But you just got to be aware of it. You got to have good accountants down there and lawyers. So we set up a subsidiary down there, and you got to do your homework, right? Who you're dealing with, and just make sure you're watching everything like a hawk, and be aware. I'm present CEO of the company. I'm an officer of the company, and so there's very strong legal obligations for me to make sure that we're doing everything properly. And so like I said, we just walked into Brazil, recently, and so it's early days, and hopefully we don't have to come to that situation. But certainly, I'm going in there eyes wide open, and being aware that you never know, something could happen. And it's not just Brazil. I think most of the, I hate to say it, I've worked in Africa, and I I've looked at stuff in Russia, and I've looked at stuff all over the world, and corruption is a global scourge. And you just, even in North America, I hate to say it, you just got to be aware of what you're dealing with.
No, excellent. So, gentlemen, this ends kind of my organized formal questions for you. We do have a bit of a list from the audience, though, so I think this will kind of nicely take us home. There's one I'm going to put a pin in that's all for all of you, but there's a couple of grab bag questions that are company specific. Luke, I got one for you. First of all, from Salamoni Zamani, just maybe check out your inbox, Luke. He's asking if you got any opportunities for geological students who want to advance their skills working with Nucor. So maybe see if there's an internship there for him or something. But
well, Matt, interesting. That actually kind of raises a good point. So Ghana has 2 mining universities in country, and it's actually one of the most sought after careers in country. So we get dozens of those types of emails and requests a week coming through our inboxes. And again, it really highlights what a pro, mining country Ghana is. I mean, you look again at North America and other parts of the world where, mining is a dirty word and people don't want to be involved in it, and the struggles in North America to find people to work and so on and so forth. I mean, again, that's a great example, Matt, right there. And I'm glad you raised it, because we get dozens of resumes through our inbox. And the other big advantage, again, in West Africa and Ghana is most of these individuals have, gone to mining university, but then been trained by Newmont and Anglo and Goldfields and the major mining companies who, as you know, whether you're sitting in Nevada or you're sitting in Ghana, you're getting the same training as an employee of any of those countries, any of those companies, and then we get to leverage all of that, so on and so forth. So indirectly, you raised a very important point.
Well, thank you, Solomon, for making me look good there.
That? Can I just add on to what Luke said? I feel your pain. I remember, when I was a young geologist in the 1990s, it was an awful bear market. And then, of course, to add the cherry on top, the Briac scandal came along. And it was very, very hard to find work. And so my recommendation is, if you're looking for work, I used to go to all the conferences. I'd go to the Roundup conference in Vancouver. I go to PDAC, or I go to the Cambridge Show conference and just try, go to all the booths and talk to people and bring a resume, introduce yourself. That's what I'd recommend if you're looking for work. But I feel your pain. Right now, 2 years ago, there was tons of work. And then, of course, mining being mining, it turns around, it does a 180 and it dries all up. But you know what? I recommend young people go into mining because we don't have enough metal and there's not enough people. We don't have enough geologists or engineers. And you know what? Like I said, I'm a geologist and it's been an incredibly rewarding career and a lot of fun and probably one of the more interesting areas to go into. So good luck on that.
I like this. I like the job pitch here. We'll see if we can get a couple of new recruits into the industry from this conversation.
There we go.
Yeah, exactly, right. I will say, I was just going to say, just lightheartedly, Luke, that I can attest to that. I've done a couple of panels with Greg, your geo, and I've come away with my own collection of emails asking for an in to whoever, right? So I know what you're talking about there. This one's for Pat. I think it's a little bit of follow-up just from E79. Do you have any long-term plans to the gold in Australia, and how do you intend what do you plan to do with that?
The gold assets in Australia are excellent. We've had some really good drill results, and but as probably Luke and Simon can attest, just no love. And it's like I said 2 years ago, everything was hopping, and we put out good drill results, and there wouldn't be any interest. So the assets are in good standing, and so we have lots of credits on them because we drilled, we drilled over 7,000 meters at Myrtleford in the Twist Creek area, another 4,000 meters up at 7,000 meters in Happy Valley and 4,000 meters at Twist Creek. So right now we kind of put them on the back burner. But that being said, it's interesting. We've had a number of groups that have approached us to maybe do something with them, but we're not going to give them away. And, if investor appetite comes back for junior golds, then we'll dust them off and we'll do something. And, the reason I came to this company originally was because I thought they're really good assets and I thought they're really geologically interesting and obviously, just interest in that whole region in the state of Victoria is really cool off. But, as you're well aware, these things come in cycles and at some point, I think something will at some point these assets will be advanced.
Okay. And then just one more here for you, Pat. Just nothing. I'll tell you if you're getting bushwhacked or shanghaied here. Just questions around. You're moving to Brazil. You're transitioning your company, switching strategies. And there's just a question from Tiffany here, wondering. How crowded is that space right now? Green energy, metals. Land. Is there a land rush going on, or how much of a
depends where you are? So that's a really great question. In Minas Gerais, and specifically in the Lithium Valley area, where Sigma Lithium is, everybody's jumping in there. And, there's Australians, there's Canadians, there's Chinese everywhere. And so, we're looking at other areas of the country, for projects, but you're absolutely, there are other groups in there and you do have to move fast. So, A lot of the ground is tied up, but it's mostly just locals. And so, and like I said, we have a Brazilian team, and so we're able to engage people. Like I said, we got a few deals almost ready to go, and we'll announce those soon. But certainly, yeah, everybody's jumping in there, and because everybody was jumping into the James Bay region of Quebec for lithium, and obviously Australia, but Brazil's the next hot area. But luckily, there's other areas to look for lithium. But we're also looking for nickel and copper, and hopefully we'll have some news on that soon.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. And then, so yeah, I kind of left one here at the end, but potentially for everybody. And after this, we'll call it. It's just a friendly reminder for more questions here. We're getting down to the nitty gritty, but Simon, I'll let you take this one first. No specific question for you, but just Adrian asks, are there any industry bodies in the respective countries that act as a coordinated lobbying group for foreign mining countries? For example, the Foreign Miners Association of Brazil or Ghana, et cetera, right? Or are you kind of going it alone in terms of that sort of outreach and lobbying efforts?
No, there's a mining association in Guatemala, and we all work together with the people from Pan American and the people we're from Bluestone and the nickel producers and the cement producers. So there is a lobby here, and it does have an impact on the government. And I think that we're making good progress as far as how that could affect to reduce that high unemployment rate, right? Which is, like I said, 59%. It's a good lobby.
And then, yeah, so I mean, really kind of rephrasing the question, and Luke, I'll have you. I mean, how do you want to just provide some color there? I mean, how advanced is it? How organized is it? How large is it? What are some of the outreach efforts that it does?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the Ghana Chamber of Mines. I mean, again, you've got 3 of the top 10 largest gold producers in operating in Ghana. So I mean, the Chamber of Mines does a great job in terms of promoting the industry. You've also talked about MIF, which is the Minerals Income and Investment Fund. So they're actively looking to invest in the sector and support both small scale and other mines in country. There's lots of different kind of groups in Ghana that are advocating for mining, but again, you don't need to do a ton given the long history there is, and given it's such a well-established sector.
Excellent. Final thoughts to you, Pat?
Yeah, in Brazil, there's IBRAM, which is the Brazilian Mining Association, and actually they had a Brazil Day, PDAC last year, and you had the Minister of Mines came up, and all kinds of officials from the Brazilian government for this Brazil Day. And then they had presentations from companies that are active in Brazil, and it was very well done. So they are definitely open for business and looking for investment in the country. And absolutely. But mining's a big business in that country. So obviously there would be an association to represent everybody.
Mm-hmm. I remember that. I think I got a cup of coffee from that Brazil Day at PDAC there last year. I was enjoying some Colombian Joe there. So, but I think that's it.
Very good coffee down there, by the way. Yes.
Unsurprising, eh? No, thank you for your time, gentlemen. I think this is what we'll call it here. As always, thank you from Six. Thank you from Matthew Mickleborough here, Junior Resource Investing. Simon, Luke, and Pat, thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.